Hello, everybody, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 18 of A Conversation with Cometan. Of course, I'm your host, Cometan, and today I'm coming to you, wherever you are in the world, to speak to you about vicinality, essentially coming into vicinality with the Astronist Institution. I'm really excited to do this lecture today because it is one that I want to revisit. Really, I have explored this idea before of vicinality, actually a year ago, almost, and of course now that a year has passed, I want to do this kind of lecture again as part of this year's lecture series. And I just want to explore in greater depth what this concept means, what it means to come into vicinality, and of course, what consequences and implications that has. So I hope that you're going to enjoy this lecture today. Now, the contents really of this lecture is threefold. The first sort of element of the lecture will focus on explaining what the state of vicinality is and what the process of coming into vicinality with the Astronist Institution actually entails. Okay, so that's the first thing, is sort of those grounding fundamental aspects of who, what, and of course then we're going to look a little bit later at why. Reflections on the first Vicinal Assembly, which I mentioned as taking place a year ago, and this was the last time I kind of spoke on this topic of vicinality, and then also exploring some of the short-term but also the long-term objectives of the Astronist Institution in regards to vicinality. And then thirdly, introducing something a little bit new, which is what I call vicinal theory, and sort of more of the theoretical dimensions really to Astronist denominations and how they relate to one another and interact. So we've got three objectives today. We've got three responsibilities that we need to fulfill by the end of this lecture. So to start with the first one, let's go with the nature of vicinality. So let's explore what this means. Vicinalism, let's start with vicinalism then. Vicinalism is the principle that underlies vicinality, and it aims really to unite. I've put there the space philosophy movement, but actually what it should be as well is any cosmocentric thinker, whether they belong to the space philosophy movement or not. So that is the aim of vicinalism. The reason why I've put space philosophy movement is because that's kind of pertaining more to actual organizations and denominations rather than individuals. You more often refer to individuals in terms of cosmocentrism than the space philosophy movement. Anyway, so this means uniting space philosophy movement in terms of their identity, in terms of their operations, the activities that they're conducting, and then also in terms of their beliefs and ideas. And of course, this means to come into vicinality. And when, of course, this process takes place of uniting under Astronism and the Astronist Institution more specifically, this is called Vicinalisation. Now, this entails the process by which an Astronist or Astronist-related denomination comes together and amalgamates with the Astronist Institution. So in that, as the consequence of vicinalisation, the operations of a denomination generally would come under the auspices of the Astronist Institution. The Astronist Institution would then control what that organization does and the types of information that it produces. And that is the difference between an institutional denomination of Astronism and a non-institutional denomination of Astronism, which is an important distinction that I'll be making a little bit later on. So essentially, Vicinalism and vicinality are the Astronist equivalents of what the Christian Church would describe as coming into communion with each other. That's the best way to describe vicinalism and vicinality. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to say here, is trying to kind of unite these thinkers, the cosmocentric thinkers, under one roof, which is astronism, of course, and then more specifically the Astronist Institution. And that is the aim of vicinalism, which you could say is a little bit like ecumenism from the Christian perspective, but obviously we're talking about the Astronist perspective here today. Now, vicinality, of course, comes from, I've not put it up here, but it actually comes from the word vicinity. That's where it comes from. It means to be close, to be within the vicinity of something. And of course, this means to be in the vicinity of astronism. So, of course, then therefore, vicinality is a state. It is a quality. It is also a characteristic. And it can be applied to a person or a concept, and it often is, but actually more often it is related to a denomination, an organization, or a group. Like we have different denominations of Christianity, there are different denominations of astronism, and what vicinality attempts to do is to, in a way, bring as many of those into the Astronist Institution's orbit as possible in order to, well, to bring about transcension. And that's what I'm going to look about in this next paragraph here. So transcension is really important to vicinality, because really what transcension is, what vicinality is aiming for is transcension. Ultimately, vicinality sees itself, vicinal theory sees itself as just a means to achieve transcension. The idea that if cosmocentric thinkers aren't united under a single flag, under a single name, under a single identity, then we will forever remain divided, and so therefore we will not achieve transcension. So that is the underlying theory of vicinalism, and that's why, of course, vicinalism exists, in order to resolve that potential problem. Specifically, of course, analytic vicinality means that a denomination agrees with the Astronist Institution's plan of transcension. Okay, so what I'm trying to say there is that vicinality is actually an agreement on transcension, which is, of course, one of the central Astronist dogmas. And it describes sort of an agreement, a cooperation, an understanding between the Astronist Institution and another denomination over the nature of transcension. So a denomination, a group, cannot become an institutional denomination until it accepts the Astronist Institution's understanding and plan for transcension. Okay, so that is kind of the fundamental element of vicinality, you could say. It's that defining part, that transcension is the determiner of whether something is in vicinality with the Astronist Institution or whether it is not. And of course, then also what we have is this idea that vicinality, coming into vicinality with the Astronist Institution, means to participate in and contribute to the institution's economy of transcension. Lot of words there. What I'm trying to say there is that when a denomination accepts transcension as the institution has put it forth, what that denomination then is actually doing is helping to contribute to transcension. It is working in the economy of transcension. It is bringing about transcension by accepting the Astronist Institution's plan. So the Astronist Institution has a plan. We have a plan to achieve transcension. And if you accept that or want to help develop that more, then you are participating in the economy of transcension, which is managed by the Astronist Institution. So vicinality is therefore an essential concept for the management of transcension, which is something that I actually didn't think about before, but only through doing this lecture have I actually realized that vicinality is really a very important to how we bring about transcension. If there is no vicinality, if there is no agreement on how we achieve transcension, then how are we going to achieve transcension? We're not going to. So the point is that vicinality has to come, and then transcension comes after that, which actually provides vicinality not just with a practical denominational role, but actually, in actual fact, a soteriological role, which is very interesting, something that I hadn't thought of before. So vicinality efficiently distinguishes between which entities are willing to participate in the economy of transcension and those which are not. Non-institutional denominations of astronism, it is still debated as to whether they are contributing to transcension. Some of them are still classed as astronism, even though they don't actually profess transcension. And so that is a difficult part. Some of these areas are still being thought out. So it is kind of difficult to, at this stage, say, well, this is definitely astronism, this is definitely not. There are, because it's still new, there are still movements that are coming to terms with the Astronist Institution's announcement last year that transcension is now a dogma, for example, which is obviously what I was part of last year when we announced that. There are still organizations that I'm in touch with, denominations that still haven't accepted that yet, and I think that will just take time. These are all practical problems, you know, that are involved with running different denominations and trying to please everyone, you know, but it is a difficult one. Obviously, you can't succeed in vicinalization or vicinality without accepting transcension, but there is still this debate on whether some of the denominations that I'm going to speak about are astronist if they don't directly profess transcension. Some of them indirectly profess it, and it is part of their underlying philosophy, but they don't explicitly profess it. And so that is still an ongoing issue. And that's fine. These issues are still ongoing, and that is absolutely fine. The point is not to fix everything, you know, overnight. The point is to try to bring about negotiation and mutual understanding of where different denominations are coming from. Okay, so that's vicinality. And so, of course, what it means to not be in vicinality is avicinality, including all those individuals and groups not in agreement with the Astronist Institution's plan for the execution of transcension. Okay, so that's what avicinality means. It means to not kind of be in agreement with sort of that theology, that philosophy, essentially. And of course, what that means in a practical sense is not that we can't speak to those other denominations or work with them in other areas. One of the areas is the idea that astronism fundamentally is cosmocentric. And so I speak with different denominations on the topic of cosmocentrism and trying to develop that area. So that is a way of engaging, kind of getting that mutual dialogue without having to get into areas yet that are more complex. It's about galvanizing our similarities. It is about getting sort of that mutual understanding of that mutual worldview. That is really, really important. And it's also understanding as well that we don't actually have to agree on everything. There are some things that we have to agree on, though. And I think that as time's going on and as these different movements are developing, what we have to agree on is becoming more clear. And of course, the process of transcension and how we deal with this process and approach this process is becoming one of those main topics of at the forefront, really, of dialogue. And of course, that is important as well, is bringing it into the dialogue, because it hasn't always been spoken about as such a forefront topic or issue, especially in the cosmist community. I mean, there have been other sort of aspects of what I would understand as aspects of transcension as being the focus of the cosmist community. For example, cosmic resurrection, for example. But, you know, I just see that as kind of one part of transcension that the cosmists have specified or focused on. What I want to get them to do is to look at the broader process of how we actually get to that reward, as just one of the many rewards that I see that astronism can, transcension can bring about. So it's about dialogue. It's about getting that mutual understanding. It is about getting that mutual worldview solid, and it is also about time. It is also about letting time take its course in that sense. So we have on the theoretical side, the philosophical side, quite a few issues to still sort out. And then also you've got the kind of more practical organizational side. And what we refer to this as is organizational amalgamation. And I see this as a consequence of vicinalization. So organizational amalgamation is when, you know, two denominations come together and just have closer cooperations. They host events together. They share ideas together. They engage in promotion together. And that's an example of vicinality, of being in vicinality with the Astronist Institution, is working with the Astronist Institution and, of course, you know, believing the same things, but also doing your own work separate from the Astronist Institution, which is still an important element. The institutional denominations of astronism, even though they are part of the Astronist Institution and may be seen as denominations of the Astronist Institution, they still operate somewhat autonomously, not entirely, but somewhat autonomously. And I think it's this cooperationist approach that should be taken, where there's that greater cooperation between a denomination of the Astronist Institution and the actual Astronist Institution itself. It's like, you know, I mean, in the Catholic Church, there are denominations within the Catholic Church. You've got the different churches, you've got the Eastern churches within the Catholic Church, you've got the Latin Church, of course, and then you've got the sort of the branches of that. You know, you've got Opus Dei, you've got all these different fraternities and orders and things like that, and they all work together. They're all in cooperation with each other, but they are also distinct entities within the Catholic Church. And so it's something similar to that. This is not something particularly new, but we do have particular issues that are, what could you say, that are unique to astronism because of what we believe. And one of those is transcension. And agreeing really on a plan for transcension. So greater collaboration between the Astronist Institution and those groups and organizations that we refer to as institutional denominations. So that's kind of section one finished. You know, we kind of have a good understanding now of what vicinality is, what vicinalization entails on both a theoretical side, but also a practical side. Let's now look at more in depth on the process of vicinalization. And the way that I'm going to approach this is to look at the first Vicinal Assembly, which took place almost a year ago. It took place on the 25th of April, 2021. And it really entailed a discussion of current matters of relevance to cosmocentric thinkers or space religion. And also matters of space exploration more broadly as well were discussed. My contributions to the assembly were to call for the vicinalization of the space philosophy movement, which I think got a mixed response. Some people really loved that, and I got some really good feedback. Others, a bit more difficult to try to bring around, you could say, or try to explain to. So it is a process, and I always understood that about vicinalization. It is going to be a long process, not something that is going to happen overnight. And so I think just the main takeaway from the first Vicinal Assembly was just getting that grounding of what we believe and just putting out there how we identify as each other, and then just deciding really how we go forward with our cosmocentric beliefs. That was what the first Vicinal Assembly to me achieved. And it also achieved the first introduction of this concept of vicinality, which hadn't really been introduced publicly before that, I don't think, unless maybe it was in the Omnidoxy, but I don't think it was. I'll have to think about that. It might have been, but not on such a public platform as an event, as being part of an event. So I think that the first Vicinal Assembly did well. Do I think we're ready for the second? No, I don't think that we've progressed anywhere near enough yet for a second Vicinal Assembly to take place. I'm not in the right mindset yet to do that. I don't think that I've developed vicinal theory enough. I think that there's still more work to do with that. And I think that the astrodoxy will be the production of that work, and the astrodoxy is going to deal with vicinal theory and get an even greater understanding of vicinality. I also think that we've just not progressed yet as a cohesive movement yet, a cohesive religion. So I think that more time needs to take place first before the second Vicinal Assembly can be arranged. When will it be arranged? I don't know. I think it's just going to be time will tell on that. But at least we've got the first one out of the way. We've got that we've put the gauntlet down. We've put the gauntlet down, it's there, it exists, it's out there, it's in history now. Let's move on and try to develop this vicinality as much as we can, trying to bring the cosmocentric community together. And of course, the production of bringing the cosmocentric community together is what I refer to as the astrosa. Now, the astrosa is a term that was first introduced in the Omnidoxy, and it refers to the worldwide community of astronists, those worldwide community of people or the universal community of people who think cosmocentrically, who hold a cosmocentric or astrocentric worldview. And of course, the astrosa and the understanding of of sort of this global community that has this fundamental shared worldview is very important. This exists in other religions, and so it felt only right to develop this idea for astronism. And of course, vicinalism and vicinality are attempting to develop ultimately the astrosa. The astrosa is the community in sort of analipsocentric terms. It is the community dedicated to the fruition of transcension as the central astronist endeavor. Okay, so that's the Astrosa. I would say that the like I said, the vicinalization is working towards the development and expansion of the Astrosa. Okay, the definition of the Astrosa, you could say. Now, the process of denominization is different from that of vicinalization. I would say that denominization is it is the precursor to vicinalization. It is the lesser form of vicinalization. It is not as narrow, it is broader than vicinalization. And denominization means to become an Astronist denomination, okay? An Astronist denomination is a designation made through scholarly consensus on the nature of a movement as to whether it resembles the Astronist worldview and beliefs, okay? So an Astronist denomination is something that is a designation that there is no set procedure for per se, except that the group in question adheres, and there's no sort of set criteria, except that the group adheres to a cosmocentric worldview. And as I said before, transcension has become, in the last year or so, another determiner of astronicity, or that's not the right word. That's not the right word. It could be astronicity actually. No, because that's astronic tradition. I would say astronist identity maybe is what transcension is bringing about as the main determiner. So the process of denominization results in a group becoming an Astronist denomination, but from the perspective of the Astronist Institution, a group does not undergo vicinalization does not undergo vicinalization. A group that does not undergo vicinalization will remain a non-institutional denomination of Astronism. So denominization means that a group becomes a denomination of Astronism, obviously, but vicinalization means that a denomination of Astronism becomes part of the Astronist Institution. So it's a narrower, a denomination of a denomination, for example, is what you could describe it as. And I think, oh no, not yet, there's some more denominations that I want to list who I think are part of Astronism as part of my scholarly consensus. The process of vicinalization then, which may of course be colloquially referred to as coming into vicinality, refers to this process of becoming part of the Astronist Institution. So not just becoming part of Astronism, but becoming part of its founding denomination, the Astronist Institution. Vicinalization is in fact currently a little simpler than denominization in order to achieve. It requires only a group's declaration of the following. So, that the plan established by the Astronist Institution to execute the most sacred endeavor of transcension is right, proper, and true. So that is the declaration that must be made by a group, by a denomination, in order for it to become vicinalized, in order for it to partake in the Astronist Institution's endeavor of transcension, okay? And once that has taken place, then the denomination becomes an institutional denomination of Astronism, no longer, therefore, a non-institutional denomination, okay? And of course, section 3, the final section of this lecture, this is going to be looking at denominology, which is the study of Astronist denominations, not to be confused with demonology, because they sound very similar, but it's denominology, okay? And then also vicinal theory, which I'm excited to introduce. So denominology studies the form, structures, and interrelations of Astronist denominations. Its aim is to understand how and why different Astronist denominations form. It is also it also possesses the aim to determine what kind of group constitutes being classified as an Astronist denomination. Like I said earlier, there are debates around what is Astronist denomination, what is Astronist, what is part of Astronism, what is not. And there is this sort of ongoing debate as to whether a group accepts transcension or not. Is that part of Astronism then? That is the ongoing debate. And then also to compare different Astronist denominations to one another. Again, that is the central aim of the denominology discipline. There are many movements other than Astronism that may be classified as space religions or space philosophies. And here, let's just go through a few. We've got astronautic humanism, Russian cosmism, which is actually historical cosmism, you could say. And then you've got contemporary cosmism, the Turing Church, cosmosis religion, Ashworthianism, cosmotheism, cosmodeism, and also many others as well. Those are just some that are most prominent to me. Now, according to Vicinal theory, which is the new introduction of, it is the sort of astrodoxical introduction or approach to Vicinalism. It asserts, Vicinal theory asserts that cosmocentrism and transcension are the central prerequisites or characteristics for a movement to be considered a space religion and a space philosophy, but also as well as part of Astronism. And in this regard, Vicinal theory constitutes a different perspective on Astronism and what that term does and does not include in practical terms in relation to real individuals and groups. Vicinality has to contend with factors of Astronism different from general META-ASTRONIST theory. Wait, so maybe Vicinal does not see it as the embodiment. Yes, this is how Vicinal theory changes. So META-ASTRONIST theory regards Astronist Institution and Astronism to be intertwined, that you can't separate the two, that the Astronist Institution is Astronism, because I founded the Astronist Institution and I set the Astronist Institution's proprietorship of Astronism. Now, Vicinal theory kind of challenges that a little bit, because what it says is that the Astronist Institution is not the embodiment of Astronism, that it is simply a denomination of Astronism, that Astronism is broader than the Astronist Institution. And so this idea of Vicinal theory is becoming more and more popular, even with myself to some degree, but not quite yet. I've not quite accepted all of it yet, but yes, to some degree, I do see where Vicinal theory is coming from in this regard. I think instead it sees Astronism as broader, as encompassing a wider group of movements unified through cosmocentrism, and of course, which in turn produces institutional and non-institutional denominations. So the very fact that there can exist non-institutional denominations of Astronism means that the Astronist Institution is detached from Astronism itself. Now, what Vicinalism aims for is the unification of cosmocentric thinkers under the banner of Astronism and the Astronist identity. And of course, vicinalization is more specific to the Astronist Institution. So there are some issues with terminology there, I think. But as time goes on, hopefully they'll become a little bit clearer, I hope. But yes, that's the underlying aim of Vicinalism, is to unify under the cosmocentric thinkers, under the banner of transcension, under the banner of Astronism, the cosmocentric thinkers. And of course, Vicinal theory tries to explore what that means in both practical terms as well as in theoretical terms. So there are two processes, of course, that I've introduced here. The first is vicinalization and the second is denominization. Now, vicinalization, let's just go over them again. As I said, is a little narrower than denominization. Vicinalization means a group specifically follows the plan of transcension set out and managed by the Astronist Institution. So you could say that vicinalization is very analipsocentric, more than denominization, you could say. Denominization simply means a group is considered a branch of astronism as a denomination, but hasn't yet officially demonstrated its allegiance to the plan of transcension as set out by the Astronist Institution. Okay, so there are, you could say, there are elements here that are differing in the sense that denominization, of course, can be looked at in an analipsocentric point of view. It can be looked at through the lens of transcension, but I think that ultimately denominization is cosmocentric. It is bringing together denominations that are cosmocentric in orientation, whereas vicinalization is bringing in denominations that are analipsocentric in orientation, that are focused on the plan of transcension and how that has been set out by the Astronist Institution. Whether that will change in the future is something that we've yet to see, but I think it could do when more plans of transcension emerge, which is another topic for another time, because I think this has become so complicated already. So, let's just leave that to another time. But I think to just push forward in the endeavor of transcension and in the endeavor of vicinalization, the Astronist Institution considers the aforementioned movements as denominations of astronism. And then, of course, non-institutional denominations are those that follow the cosmocentric worldview and are thereby astronist, but do not subscribe to the Astronist Institution's plan of transcension. Okay, the institutional denomination is a group that adheres to both the cosmocentric worldview and the Astronist Institution's plan of transcension. Okay. For the non-institutional denominations, they may have their own plan of transcension, or that differs from the Astronist Institution, or they may have no set plan of transcension. Okay, a lot of them, most of them don't at this stage. Even cosmism really doesn't have much of a plan of transcension officially. So that is something that they need to figure out, or that needs to be, or the doctrines of those movements need to be looked at from an analipsocentric point of view in order to construct a plan of transcension from their doctrines. But that is something that maybe I'll do that if I get time, but that is something that they really should be looking at, really. But again, that all takes time, because first of all, in order to get denominations to think analipsocentrically or to consider transcension, you have to get transcension out there as a topic of debate and of discussion. And of course, we're still at the beginning of doing that. So there's still a long, long way to go before we get to establishing different plans of transcension. Of course, I'm aligned to the Astronist Institution's plan of transcension, which may also be referred to as the Cometanic plan of transcension, because it's the plan that I created for transcension. And then finally, what vicinalism sort of means essentially is that it has, I suppose, what the implications of vicinalism are very meta-astronistic. Vicinalism has various different consequences for how we understand what astronism is and what it constitutes, and also namely because there is an acknowledgement within Vicinalism that non-institutional forms and institutional forms of astronism exist. And of course, also, I think that Vicinalism equates cosmocentrism with being astronist and elevates the plan of transcension to being the defining element of vicinality. So I think that there is this kind of battle, really, in a way, between cosmocentrism and analipsocentrism. And I think that's what distinguishes denominization and vicinalisation. So it's interesting, and there are meta-astronist theories and issues that are arising from the promotion of vicinalism, because and that is a good thing. That is a really, really good thing. It shows that development of astronism. It shows that development of astronism that we really need as a fully fledged religion with different denominations, different distinctions, just as Christianity is. There's so much complexity within Christianity. You could spend all your life trying to understand the complex differences between Protestantism, Eastern Orthodoxy, the Catholic Church, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, so that this shows the development of vicinalism actually shows the development of astronism. It makes things more complex, yes, but also shows that astronism as a fully fledged religion is forming, albeit slowly, which is exciting. And then finally, I think if a group accepts the plan of transcension as it is presented by the Astronist Institution, then it becomes vicinalized, while a group that doesn't remains just an Astronist denomination or unvicinalized. So again, they've got this vicinalization or this vicinalized state or unvicinalized or avicinality, which again is trying to make that distinction between a group that professes cosmocentrism, which is rightly part of astronism or rightly considered to be astronist, and then a group that that specifically adheres to the plan of transcension set out by the Astronist Institution. So I think it's just a little lecture, really, only 20 slides, so it's just a really short one in that sense. But what I hope to have tried to kind of capture here is the landscape of vicinalism, its aims, its kind of structure, theoretical structure, how different denominations of astronism differ, how they also are similar to one another. And I think also, as time goes on, vicinal theory, especially through the astrodoxy, I'll be doing a lot of work on vicinal theory in the astrodoxy. I think then we'll get a better understanding, a clearer understanding of what makes an Astronist denomination institutional and what makes it non-institutional, and then also what is not astronism at all. So I think that, again, will just take time and development and continued dialogue between myself and some of these really great people who were involved in cosmism, the contemporary form, and also their own separate movements as well. So I hope that you've enjoyed this quick little lecture for episode 18 of A Conversation with Cometan season 3. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode, episode 19. So see you then, guys, and have a lovely rest of your day.